Through years of reviews and ridicule, this adaptation of a literary classic earned a spot among the worst within the vast library of the Nintendo Entertainment System. But does it really deserve that reputation? To understand how this strange game came to be, it helps to start with the story it's based on, a tale of duality and inner conflict that's fascinated readers for more than a century. The title of said story, of course, is The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Written and published in 1886 by Scottish author Robert Louis Stevenson, the story explores the duality of human nature through the character of Dr. Henry Jekyll, a scientist who creates a potion that transforms him into the violent Mr. Hyde. As a refresher, the story explores such subjects as the mentioned duality of human nature, the nature of good and evil, the impact of scientific ambition, and the dangers of suppressing one's inner self, which are still relevant themes even to this very day. Despite some twists and turns during its development, including rumors that Stevenson himself may have been using drugs during the final stretch of the story's drafting, the story was an instant success, selling over 40,000 copies in just 6 months. It quickly became a cornerstone of Gothic fiction and of English literature as a whole. Over the years, it has inspired countless adaptations in film, television, animation, comics, and many other forms of media, and more importantly, video games. Which brings us to the infamous NES game, a game that tried to bring this complex psychological story to 8-bit life. So, what exactly is this game? The game in question is the aptly named Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It was first released in Japan for the Famicom computer on April 8, 1988 under the title Jekyll no Hake no Homogatoki, which roughly translates to Dr. Jekyll's Hour of the Wandering Demon. Unfortunately, there isn't much available in the game's development or even its launch period. All we know that it was developed by a little-known company called Advanced Communication Company, and it was published by Toho's video game division, of all folks, in Japan, and a year later by Bandai in North America. There are also quite a few differences between the Japanese and American versions. Most notably, both changed the level order entirely, and the Japanese version also has enemies that the North American version doesn't have. Humorously enough, the North American manual still mentions some of these removed enemies. Remember this point because this will be very important later. Let's discuss the game's premise and gameplay mechanics. After all, that alone has confused plenty of players over the years. The game loosely follows the plot of the original story. You play Dr. Jekyll, who is making his way to be one of the Miss Millicent, an original character made for the game. Of course, it's not that easy. As he walks through town, a variety of hazards, including townsfolk, animals, and explosions caused by random mad bombers, cause him stress, which adds to his stress meter. When his stress meter fills up due to failing to avoid these hazards, Jekyll eventually transforms into Mr. Hyde. In these sections, you play as Mr. Hyde, moving through an alternate version of the level, scrolling from the opposite direction from the Jekyll sections, something that was noted by Japanese marketing and reviewers. Here, the gameplay shifts into kind of a side-scrolling shooter. Hyde fights off various monsters to reduce his stress in return to being Jekyll. But there's a catch. If Hyde ever advances past the point where Jekyll was when he transformed, it's an instant game over, where God himself strikes you down with a lightning strike. The game then becomes an odd mix of survival, patience, and rote memorization as you try to carefully guide Jekyll forward without triggering too many Hyde sections. However, you get the best ending if you beat the Hyde section before he catches up with Jekyll during the final stage, in which case you do, all the stressors in the world disappear, and you can safely get to your wedding with no issue. With all of that out of the way, with an ambitious structure and a literary classic as its source, how did this game end up on so many worst of all time lists? To start, one of the biggest criticisms was simply that a game of this ambition wasn't expressed clearly enough. On the surface, you might seem to think it's almost inscrutable, and indeed, many critics and players alike roasted the game for being too vague about how it worked, especially regarding the many game mechanics regarding the duel stages and how to transform to and from Hyde. And yes, certainly, A certain infamous nerd, the angry video game nerd, also known as James Rolfe, hammered this point home in what became his second ever video, which helped launch him to fame.
Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest, may be a pretty bad game, but it is God compared to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That game is just the epitome of bad.
While technically a comedy act first and foremost, he brought a game to a wider audience, who ended up trying the game for itself and coming away feeling the same as him.
So, every video game nerd said this game sucked. It was the worst game he ever played. Well, let's see that.
Do a favor and don't play this game. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde for the NES is a horrible game. I think it's the worst game I've ever played.
This game is literally a digital potpourri of shit and garbage encased in plastic.
And Mr. Hyde, on the other hand, is pretty worthless. But you already knew that.
I strongly recommend avoiding any contact with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Just toss it, okay? No, wait. That's not cruel enough punishment. Let me see here for a minute. And ooh, hey, I like that.
But from what I've seen, it's pretty bad. So I give it a 2 out of 5. Because a lot of the reviews on GameFAQs and whatnot give it a 1 out of 10. So it must suck. I don't know.
The angry video game nerd's coverage of the game was so particularly infamous that he went on to cover the game a total of 3 whole times throughout the years. Regarding Dr. Jekyll especially, his sections are often cited as slow, boring, and unfair. Since you can only walk, jump, and swat with your cane, which does little to deter most enemies, you might be largely forced into a strategy of avoiding everything. But as previously stated, that's easier said than done for more reasons detailed later. With this strategy in mind, the angry video game nerd and others of his ilk know to be found that these segments were among the most boring they'd ever played. The game's enemy design adds to this frustration. The structures that appear during Jekyll's walk, from aggressive townspeople to animals to bomb-dropping madmen, are difficult to avoid and are often seen as examples of cheap difficulty. High sections, where you'll gain more offensive power through the cycle wave ability and other enhancements, hardly helps from escaping criticism either. It is often brought up that the controls remain awkward and sluggish and that enemy patterns can feel erratic and hard to predict. Confusion also arose from inconsistencies between the Japanese and North American versions. The North American manual famously references enemies that aren't even present in that version of the game, adding to the overall confusion that you and most other players in the game might feel from the game itself. The game's controls are another frequent target of criticism. You and others might note that Jekyll's hitbox feels unfair. It's easy to take hits that don't visually appear to connect in the sections. Movement and combat controls are also often described as clunky and unresponsive, particularly during the high sections where the extra precision required becomes more critical. Another issue commonly raised is the game's tone. While it loosely follows the basic plot of the novella, many elements, such as the bombers and hostile townsfolk, seem to be strange when keeping the original story's plot of a man's self-inflicted descent into madness in mind. The angry video game nerd often joked about the illogical nature of the game's enemies and overall world across his 3 videos about the game. And to top it all off, many found the game's payoff underwhelming. After enduring such a difficult and confusing experience, the reward of simply seeing Jekyll marry Miss Millicent felt anticlimactic to many, especially so with the silhouette of Mr. Hyde appearing at the indie screen if he got the best or true ending, which to many felt like an unnecessary, forced sequel that never really came to be. On paper, the game certainly seems like a mess, and it certainly garnered some of its infamy for a reason. But what you and others may overlook, and what's crucial to understanding it, is context and nuance. Personally, I do not think Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is a particularly great game. Actually, I agree with quite a few of the common criticisms. The game's difficulty, combined with the half-baked game mechanics that weren't clearly communicated, are genuine problems with the game. Particularly, the later Jekyll levels are a prime example of all the game's problems in my opinion. The extreme uptick in difficulty to an almost impossible degree, and the sluggish controls and framerate not helping either, make for a very frustrating experience. In fact, it almost ruins the experience, even for a skilled player. even with all that in mind, I still find it a very interesting game. Adapting a psychological thriller, even with Lucy, into a video game within the limited confines of the Nintendo Entertainment System, and with dual gameplay styles at that, deserves a fair bit of credit alone, and was especially ambitious for the time. However, I felt all these mechanics, even if impressive, were too heavy for the NES's already aging hardware at the time. Particularly with how the game handles two asynchronous gameplay states at the same time, causing undue stress in the game's performance combined with some questionable coding. If a game like this had been made for a more powerful system, say, the SNES or the Genesis, with more room for polish and clear design, I believe it could have been received much more positively. There's a good video series on here that goes into what makes this game tick, with a deep dive into the game's code that explains a lot of mysteries about the game. If you're interested in watching that, I'll leave links in the description. And here's something else that often gets overlooked. While the game is widely ridiculed today, it's important to remember that back then, not everyone thought Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was the worst video game ever made. In fact, some critics thought it was okay. While the modern internet, especially the angry video game nerds' 3 videos on the subject, have made the game infamous for all the wrong reasons, contemporary reviews tell a far more nuanced story. The few reviews I found from then describe the game as mediocre or interesting, but ultimately too ambitious and too difficult for the NES. In fact, this review I found from a German magazine, the December 1989 issue of Aktueller Software Mark, explicitly states that despite its minor flaws, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is one of the better games for the NES, which was already short on software, with the score they gave it basically being a 3 out of 5. In Japan especially, the true contemporary reviews I came across shared a similar sentiment to my own. The core idea is creative, but the execution falls short of the hardware's capabilities. In the April 15, 1988 issue of Famitsu, they overall felt that it was a new approach, but I think it's a bit problematic, with the final score being a 19 out of 40. In the May 10, 1991 issue of Family Computer Magazine, it got a user-submitted score of 15.10 out of 30 as part of its game report card section, and furthermore states that the forced reverse scrolling is unique in the Famicom cartridge catalog later on in the issue. And while a little later than the two prior reviews, in the 1998 book Shocking B Game Strike Back, the author writes that the overall picture is nice and atmospheric, but I just can't seem to move on. The puzzles are good, but too complicated is a problem. All very similar opinions to my own. Speaking of that point, let's rewind a bit. In my honest opinion, of the 2 regional versions that exist, I would say go play the Japanese version if you do give the game a go. The mentioned added levels and enemies round out the game to a more complete experience, so you don't have to contend with the deja vu the 2 levels repeating in the US version. There is little Japanese text, and because of that, it's English friendly, too. However, it's slightly harder due to the extra rounded out content, though it makes up for that in some ways. The time it takes for the Mad Bomber's bombs to explode is a bit longer than this version, giving you more time to react to them. And even better, there's a woman in the 2 new stages who will restore your health and stress levels. A strange choice in context, but a welcome gameplay addition nonetheless. Aside from that, there's so many minor but still appreciated changes. If you want an easier time, go with the American version, however going with the expectations that you are technically not getting the complete experience. So, to wrap it all off, does Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde really deserve its reputation as one of the worst games for the NES? In my opinion, not really. It's a flawed and frustrating game, and I'm very aware of that. But I also think it's a very creative, ambitious title for the system. Indeed, it attempts something that hasn't really been done before at the time, and arguably still hasn't been done since. The twin, asynchronous gameplay styles between good and evil haven't really been revisited by other games, and it's a shame. I'd love to see a remake of this game with better game design and hardware chops. People taking the angry video game nerds' satirical reviews as fact didn't help either. That murdered nuance and only reinforced the game's bad reputation, especially when many players try it without the critical context that the game expected, like reading the manual. And back then, most games, including this one, absolutely assumed you would. And let's be honest, on the NES, there are far worse games out there. Just look at Action 52, or the smorgasbord of broken titles from companies such as Color Dreams. Compared to those, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde at least had a unique idea and tried something different, and even though it pushed the hardware too far, it was still a playable game at the end of the day. Overall, it stumbled, but at least it tried, and sometimes that alone deserves a break. Thanks for watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the game, and others that would be a good fit for the series in the comments. And until next time, give it a break.